My name is Olivia Bennett. I am 32 years old, and the day my father died, my family smiled at me like I had already lost everything. Not openly, not enough for strangers to notice, but I saw it. My brother Mason sat across from me in the lawyer's office wearing a black suit, a gold watch, and the same little smile he had worn my entire life. It was not grief, it was victory. My stepmother Claire sat beside him with one hand resting gently on his shoulder, as if he were the wounded one, as if he had been the one driving our father to hospital appointments, as if he had been the one sleeping in a chair beside Dad's bed when the machines beeped all night, as if he had been the one holding Dad's hand when his breathing got bad, and no one else answered the phone. No one mentioned that. No one mentioned the 6 months I gave up my life. No one mentioned the medication schedules, the insurance calls, the unpaid bills, the late-night panic attacks, the doctor visits, the grocery runs, or the way Dad only called Mason when he wanted to sound strong, but called me when he was scared. Because in my family, staying never counted. Only being chosen did. And Mason had always been chosen. The lawyer, Mr. Harlan, opened the folder slowly. He was an older man with silver glasses, careful hands, and the tired expression of someone who had watched too many families become honest only when money was on the table. He cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett left clear instructions. Mason leaned back. Claire squeezed his shoulder. My Aunt Patricia looked at me with soft pity that felt almost rehearsed. I folded my hands in my lap and told myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Then Mr. Harlan began reading. To my son, Mason Bennett, I leave the Bennett family home, my investment accounts, my vehicles, and majority interest in Bennett Construction. Mason exhaled like a king hearing his crown confirmed. Claire closed her eyes dramatically. Aunt Patricia whispered, "Your father knew what he was doing." I stared at the carpet. Of course he did. My father always knew how to choose Mason first. When Mason crashed Dad's truck at 19, Dad called it a mistake. When I scratched the garage door at 16, Dad called me careless for months. When Mason dropped out of college after one semester, Dad said business ran in his blood. When I graduated with honors, Dad asked why I chose a degree that would not help the company. When Mason disappeared for weeks during Dad's illness, everyone said he was coping in his own way. When I looked exhausted, Claire told me I was making myself a martyr. So when the lawyer said Mason received everything, I was hurt, but I was not shocked. I had spent my whole life learning not to be shocked. Then Mr. Harlan turned the page. And to my daughter, Olivia Bennett. The room shifted. Mason looked amused. Claire's mouth curved slightly, ready for whatever small insult came next. I braced myself. Mr. Harlan continued. I leave the contents of the blue envelope held separately in my private file to be opened only after the main distribution has been read aloud. Mason frowned. What blue envelope? Mr. Harlan did not answer him. He reached into a second folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. Olivia. Just that. My chest tightened. For a moment I forgot how to breathe, because my father had not written my name like that in years. Not on birthday cards, not on notes, not on anything that felt personal. The room went silent. Mr. Harlan broke the seal, and that was when everything changed. But before I tell you what was in that envelope, you need to understand why my brother believed everything belonged to him. My father, Richard Bennett, built Bennett Construction from nothing. That was the family story anyway. Every Thanksgiving, every company dinner, every local business event, someone repeated it. Richard Bennett started with one truck, 2 tools, and a dream. People loved that version. It was simple, clean, heroic. But family stories are often edited by the people who benefit from them. The truth was, my mother helped build that company too. Her name was Evelyn Bennett. She kept the books when Dad could barely read a balance sheet. She answered client calls when he was on job sites. She handled permits, invoices, payroll, tax records, vendor payments, and the quiet emergencies that never made it into speeches. Dad was the face. Mom was the foundation. But foundations are easy to forget because people walk on them. When Mom died, I was 14. Mason was 17. Something broke in the house after that. Not loudly, quietly, like a beam cracking behind a wall. Dad did not know how to raise a daughter without my mother softening him. Mason learned quickly that if he acted like the son Dad wanted, He could do almost anything. And I learned that grief does not make all families closer. Sometimes it simply removes the person who held them together. 2 years later, Dad married Claire. Claire was beautiful, polished, and patient in the way people are patient when they are waiting for control to become official. She never yelled at me. That would have made her too easy to dislike. Instead, she corrected me gently. Olivia, your father has enough stress. Don't bring little complaints to him. Olivia, Mason understands the business better. Let him speak. Olivia, men like your father need peace, not emotional pressure. Little sentences, soft sentences, sentences that slowly moved me out of my own family. By the time I was 22, Bennett Construction was growing. Mason had been given a title, and I had been given responsibility without authority. Mason became vice president of operations, even though he barely showed up before 10. I became office support, which meant I did payroll, client scheduling, permit tracking, vendor calls, late invoices, and damage control whenever Mason promised something impossible. Dad called Mason a natural leader. He called me reliable. I used to think reliable was praise. It took me years to understand it was a cage. Reliable meant they could pile work on me and act surprised if I bent. Reliable meant I was expected to stay late, smile through disrespect, and fix problems quietly. Reliable meant Mason got the credit because he entered the room at the end and talked louder. Still, I stayed. Maybe because the company felt like the last place my mother still existed. Her handwriting remained on old files. Her notes were in the margins of account ledgers. Her favorite blue mug sat in the back cabinet long after the handle cracked. When I worked late, alone in the office, I sometimes imagined she was there with me, telling me not to let them make me small. But they did. Or maybe I helped them. That is the uncomfortable truth. People can only take your place at the table for so long before you start believing you were meant to stand. 5 years before Dad died, Bennett Construction landed its biggest contract, a new residential development outside the city. Mason strutted around the office like he had personally invented cement. Dad bragged about him everywhere. My son brought this deal in, he told clients. My son, not my children, not my team, my son. What nobody said was that I had prepared the bid package, corrected Mason's pricing errors, caught a clause that would have cost us thousands, and stayed 3 nights late to finish the submission. Mason signed it. Dad praised him. I filed the paperwork. That was the Bennett way. Then the project started going wrong. Mason ordered wrong materials. Subcontractors complained about late payments. One supplier threatened to freeze deliveries because Mason had ignored 3 notices. I found the notices in a drawer under takeout menus. When I confronted him, he laughed. Relax, Liv. You love emergencies. Makes you feel important. I wanted to scream. Instead, I fixed it. Because reliable daughters fix things. That same week, Dad called me into his office. For one stupid second, I thought maybe he knew. Maybe he had noticed. Maybe he would say, Olivia, you saved us. Instead, he said, your brother is under a lot of pressure. Don't make him feel judged. I stared at him. Dad, he almost froze a supplier account. And you handled it. That isn't the point. The point is family supports family. I almost laughed. Because in my family, that sentence always traveled one direction. Toward Mason, never toward me. By 30, I had my own apartment, my own bills, and still somehow no real life outside the company. I dated rarely because I canceled plans for work. I slept badly. I drank too much coffee. I kept promising myself I would leave after one more busy season. Then Dad got sick. Heart failure, complications, hospital stays, medication changes, good days, bad days, then worse days. Mason visited when people were watching. Claire performed concern beautifully, but hated anything practical. Aunt Patricia brought casseroles and advice. I handled the rest. I drove Dad to appointments. I organized pills. I argued with insurance. I slept in hospital chairs. I learned which nurses were kind and which doctors explained things clearly. I watched my father become smaller, weaker, quieter. Sickness changed him, but not enough. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at me with something close to regret. Your mother would know what to do, he said once. I answered, she usually did. He looked at me then, really looked. For a second, I thought he might say something important. Instead, he closed his eyes. Call Mason tomorrow. I need to talk to him about the company. Even dying, he reached for my brother first. I wish I could say I stopped caring. I didn't. Love does not disappear just because it is unfair. It stays and humiliates you. 3 months before Dad died, he asked me to bring him an old metal box from the company archive room. Which box? I asked. The one with your mother's initials. I knew it immediately. E.B. Evelyn Bennett. It sat on a high shelf behind tax files, old permits, and dusty binders no one opened anymore. I brought it to his house. Claire watched from the doorway. What is that? Old company documents, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Dusty things can wait. Your father needs rest. Dad's voice came from the bedroom. Bring it here, Olivia. Claire did not like that. I did. Dad sat in bed with a blanket over his knees, looking pale but alert. I placed the box beside him. His fingers rested on the lid for a long time. Your mother kept everything, he said. She was good at that. Better than me. That was true, but I said nothing. He opened the box and looked through the papers slowly. There were old contracts, early bank statements, handwritten notes, and photographs of the first office. Then he found a blue envelope. He touched it like it burned. What is it? I asked. He shook his head. Not yet. Not yet. I hated those words. They made everything feel like a locked door. He slid the envelope under a stack of papers, then looked at me. Olivia, if anything happens, remember that your mother was not quiet because she had nothing to say. I frowned. What does that mean? His face tightened. Just remember. Claire entered before he could say more. Richard, you need your medication. The moment closed. A week later, Dad changed his will. I did not know that then. Mason did, or thought he did. That was part of the problem. Mason had been telling people for years that Bennett Construction would be his. He called it legacy. Claire called it natural. Dad rarely corrected them. The company office even felt like it belonged to him, though I was the one keeping it alive. His name was on the glass door. My work was in every cabinet. When Dad died, the grief came strangely, not clean sadness, something tangled. I cried for the father I lost. I cried for the father I never really had. I cried because death ends the chance of hearing the words you waited for. Mason cried at the funeral where everyone could see. He stood near the casket, accepted condolences and said, I'll make him proud. People touched his arm. They told him he was strong. They told him his father trusted him. I stood beside the flower arrangements holding a box of tissues and feeling like staff. After the funeral, Claire hosted everyone at Dad's house. Mason gave a small speech in the living room. He talked about legacy, leadership, and responsibility. He did not mention me once, not even accidentally. Later, in the kitchen, I heard Claire whisper to Aunt Patricia. Richard knew Mason was the only one who could carry the name. Aunt Patricia replied, Olivia is sweet, but she was never built for business. I stood behind the pantry door holding a tray of cups. Sweet, reliable, not built for business. I almost walked in. Almost. Instead, I placed the cups on the counter and left. 2 weeks later, we met at Mr. Harlan's office for the reading of the will. That was where I began this story. Mason smiling, Claire pretending sadness, me trying not to expect anything, because expecting had always been dangerous. The lawyer read that Mason inherited the house, investment accounts, vehicles, and majority interest in Bennett Construction. Then he turned to me. To my daughter, Olivia Bennett, I leave the contents of the blue envelope held separately in my private file. Mason frowned. What blue envelope? Mr. Harlan opened it. Inside was a letter and a second legal document. The lawyer began with the letter. Olivia, he read, if you are hearing this, then I failed to say what I should have said while I was alive. My stomach dropped. That sounded like Dad. Not the public Dad, not the company Dad, the late-night hospital Dad. Mr. Harlan continued, I spent too many years mistaking loud confidence for strength and quiet loyalty for convenience. Your mother saw this before I did. She saw you before I did. My eyes blurred. Mason sat forward. Claire's face tightened. Your mother left instructions years ago regarding her share of the company. I ignored the spirit of them, though not the law. That was my shame. I allowed others to believe Bennett Construction was built by my hands alone. It was not. Your mother built half of it, and in the years after she passed, you protected more of it than I deserved. A sound escaped Claire, not a sob, more like anger wearing perfume. Mr. Harlan kept reading. I leave Mason what I promised publicly because I created that expectation and must bear the consequences of my weakness. But the controlling interest that came from your mother's original ownership was never mine to give away. Mason stood. What does that mean? Mr. Harlan looked at him calmly. It means I am not finished reading. Mason sat slowly. The lawyer continued. The enclosed document confirms what your mother arranged and what I have now formally restored. Evelyn Bennett's protected shares, voting rights, and intellectual property tied to company systems are transferred to Olivia Bennett. Effective immediately, Olivia holds controlling authority over Bennett Construction operations, including final approval over sale, merger, liquidation, and executive appointment. The room went silent. So silent I heard the air conditioner click. I stared at the lawyer. Mason stared at me. Claire's hand slowly slid off his shoulder. For the first time in my life, Mason looked at me like I was not invisible. He looked at me like I was dangerous. What? He said. Mr. Harlan removed his glasses. Your father left you assets, Mr. Bennett, but your mother's protected shares and voting rights passed to Olivia. That can't be right. It is right. My father left me the company. He left you majority economic benefit from his portion, the lawyer said. He did not have the legal authority to transfer your mother's protected voting rights once they were restored. Claire leaned forward. Richard would never do this. Mr. Harlan looked at her. He did. Mason turned to me. You knew? I shook my head. I didn't. He laughed once. A sharp, ugly sound. Of course you didn't. You never know anything until someone hands it to you. That old insult should have hit me. It didn't. Maybe because for once, the papers were heavier than his voice. Mr. Harlan slid copies toward each of us. There is more. Mason looked ready to explode. The lawyer continued. Mr. Bennett also left a recorded statement to be played only if the contents of the blue envelope were challenged. Claire's face went pale. Mason said, No recording. Mr. Harlan's tone stayed flat. You may challenge the will and accompanying documents in court. If you do, the recording becomes relevant. What is on it? I asked. Mr. Harlan looked at me gently. Your father's explanation. My hands were shaking now, not from victory, from too much truth arriving too late. Mason pointed at me. This is exactly what she wanted. She played the quiet nurse, stayed around him, whispered things when he was weak. Something inside me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I looked at my brother and said, I was there because he was sick. You were absent because there was nothing to inherit in a hospital room. His face reddened. Claire gasped. Aunt Patricia whispered, Olivia. I did not look away from Mason. For years, I fixed your mistakes, covered your delays, corrected your numbers, and watched you accept praise for work you did not do. If Dad finally wrote down one true thing before he died, don't blame me because it wasn't your name. Mason looked stunned. Maybe because I had never spoken to him like that. Maybe because he had never imagined I could. Mr. Harlan closed the folder. There will be a mandatory transition meeting at Bennett Construction on Monday. Until then, no operational decisions may be made without Olivia's approval. Mason laughed again, but this time there was panic in it. You think employees will follow her? Mr. Harlan looked at him. From the records I have reviewed, many of them already do. That was the sentence that changed his face, because he knew it was true. On Monday morning, I walked into Bennett Construction as something I had never been allowed to be. Not support, not reliable Olivia, not the daughter who stayed late. Authority. The office felt different before anyone said a word. People looked up from desks, some surprised, some nervous, some relieved. That last one mattered most. Mason was already in the conference room with Claire beside him, though she had no company role. That had never stopped her before. Aunt Patricia had come too, because family spectators love a second act. Mr. Harlan sat at the head of the table with Andrea Sloan, the corporate attorney who had handled my mother's original documents. Andrea was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, calm, and carrying a laptop full of things Mason did not want opened. The transition meeting began badly. Mason refused to acknowledge my authority. Claire accused me of manipulating a dying man. Aunt Patricia said women in power often become emotional if they feel overlooked. That one almost made Andrea smile. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, because for the first time, I did not need to fight for the room. The room was already mine. Andrea connected her laptop to the screen. Before we discussed leadership structure, We need to review operational risk. Mason frowned. What risk? Andrea clicked. A spreadsheet appeared. Late supplier payments, unapproved material substitutions, client complaint logs, budget overruns, missing documentation. Every mistake I had spent years quietly fixing was now organized in clean rows. Mason's name appeared again and again. His face changed. That information is internal, Andrea replied. Yes, and Olivia had access because she was handling the consequences. Claire snapped. This is character assassination. I looked at her. No, this is accounting. For once, no one laughed. Andrea continued. The company can survive, but not under current operational practices. Olivia has controlling voting authority. She may retain, remove, or restructure executive roles. All eyes turned to me. Mason leaned back. Go ahead. Say what you've been waiting to say. I looked at my brother. For years, I had imagined humiliating him, listing every time he took credit, every time he mocked me, every time Dad chose him while I swallowed the hurt. But when the moment arrived, revenge felt smaller than responsibility. The employees outside that room needed paychecks. Clients needed projects finished. My mother's company needed more than a scene. So I said, Mason, you are removed from operations immediately. His mouth opened. Claire stood. You cannot do that. I can. This company belongs to him. No, I said. This company belongs to the truth of who built it. Mason slammed his hand on the table. You think you can run construction? There it was. The old question. Not about skill, about permission. I opened the folder in front of me and slid 3 documents across the table. The corrected bid package from 5 years ago. The supplier crisis report. The payroll recovery plan I had written when Mason ignored cash flow warnings. I have been running the parts you kept breaking. The room went still. Mason looked at the papers. He recognized them. Of course he did. He had signed some of them after I wrote them. I continued. You can remain as a non-operational shareholder according to the terms. You will receive what Dad left you. But you will not make decisions that endanger this company again. Claire's voice shook with fury. Your father trusted Mason. I looked at her. My father trusted Mason in public. In private, he left me the power to stop him. That silenced her. Not forever, but long enough. The first months were brutal. Authority is not magic. You do not become respected because papers say you are in charge. You become respected by making decisions, absorbing pressure, and refusing to collapse when people test you. And everyone tested me. Some employees supported me quietly, but feared Mason would return. Some vendors wanted reassurance. Some clients demanded meetings. One subcontractor called me sweetheart during a contract negotiation. I ended the meeting in 3 minutes and awarded the work elsewhere. Word spread quickly. Olivia Bennett was not there to decorate the office. I cut waste, renegotiated supplier terms, stopped Mason's vanity expansion plan, sold 2 unused vehicles, brought payroll current, created approval systems, promoted a site manager named Teresa Cole, who had been doing senior-level work for years while Mason ignored her. Teresa became my right hand. She was 46, direct, brilliant, and allergic to nonsense. On her first day in the role, she walked into my office and said, I don't know if you know this, but half the men here are waiting for you to fail. I know. What are you going to do? Make failure inconvenient. She smiled. Good. We worked like that. Day by day, problem by problem, one section at a time, the same way I had survived my family. Mason did not disappear quietly. He sent emails questioning decisions. He visited job sites and tried giving instructions. He told old clients I was temporary. Finally, I issued a formal notice. Any interference with operations would trigger legal enforcement of the trust provisions. He stormed into my office that afternoon. You are enjoying this. I looked up from a contract. No, liar. I am not enjoying cleaning up your mess. His face twisted. Dad would be ashamed. That hurt. Even after everything, it hurt. But I did not let it show. No, Mason. Dad was ashamed already. He just waited too long to admit why. For once, my brother had no answer. He left. Claire tried a different route. She invited me to lunch. I knew it was a trap, but I went because sometimes you need to see the knife clearly. She chose an expensive restaurant where the waiters knew her name. She wore white, as if innocence had a dress code. Olivia, she began, this family has suffered enough. I stirred my tea. Which part of the suffering bothers you? The part where Mason lost control, or the part where I gained it? Her eyes hardened. You have become cruel. No, I have become unavailable for guilt. She leaned closer. Your father would not want Mason humiliated. Mason is not humiliated. He is limited. He is your brother, and I am his sister. That never stopped him. Claire's expression softened suddenly. It was almost impressive. Richard loved you, you know. I looked out the window. Maybe. He did. He just didn't know how to show it. I turned back to her. That explanation helps children survive. It does not excuse adults forever. She had no answer to that, so she reached for my mother. Evelyn was gentle. She would have handled this with grace. I smiled sadly. My mother was gentle. She was not stupid. The documents prove that. Claire's face went cold. Lunch ended quickly. A year after the lawyer opened the blue envelope, Bennett Construction looked different. Not perfect. Different. Projects were on schedule. Payroll was stable. Vendors trusted us again. Clients stopped asking if Mason was returning. The company logo remained the same, but inside, the culture changed. People got credit publicly. Mistakes were documented, not buried. No one was allowed to scream at office staff. No one called women emotional in meetings without being asked to explain the business relevance of that statement. Teresa loved that policy. The company grew carefully, not loudly. That was when the first buyout offer came. A regional construction group wanted to acquire Bennett Construction. The number was serious, large enough that Mason suddenly became friendly. He called me for the first time in months. Liv, he said, like we were normal siblings. What do you want? Don't be like that. Be faster then. He sighed. I heard about the offer. I'm sure you did. We should take it. No, you haven't even discussed it with me. You have economic interest, not operational control. That offer makes us rich. I looked around my office, at the framed photo of my mother, at the old blue envelope, at the project board full of work that employed real people. I am not selling our mother's company, so you can cash out of something you almost ruined. Our mother's company? Yes, I said. You remember her now, don't you? He hung up. 2 days later, he filed a petition challenging my management decisions. This time, I was ready. Andrea presented performance records, profit recovery, vendor statements, employee retention, project completion rates, evidence of Mason's interference. The judge was not amused. Mason lost. Again. But the final blow came from something none of us expected. Mr. Harlan called me one afternoon. His voice was careful. Olivia, there is another recording. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean? Your father made a private statement for you. It was not part of the legal transfer. He asked me to hold it until 1 year after the transition, but only if you remained with the company. I sat down slowly. A week later, I listened to my father's voice in Mr. Harlan's office. He sounded tired, older, more honest than he had ever sounded alive. Olivia, the recording began. If you are hearing this, then you stayed. I hoped you would, but I would not have blamed you if you walked away from all of us. I closed my eyes. I told myself Mason needed me more because he was reckless. I told myself you were fine because you were strong. That was cowardice. Strong children still need to be protected. Reliable daughters still need to be thanked. Tears came before I could stop them. I saw more than I admitted. I saw you correcting his work. I saw you sitting beside my hospital bed. I saw you carrying a company that should have carried you too. I was proud of you, Olivia. I was just too ashamed of my own unfairness to say it without admitting everything else. I covered my mouth. Mr. Harlan looked away to give me privacy. Dad's voice continued. Your mother trusted you because she understood strength better than I did. I mistook noise for leadership. She never did. If I left you a burden, forgive me. If I left you a chance, take it. And if Mason tries to take from you what he would not help build, do not move aside for him. The recording ended. For several minutes, I could not speak. All my life, I had wanted my father to say he was proud. He had finally said it. But death has cruel timing. The words arrived when I no longer needed them to survive, but still needed them to grieve. I took a copy of the recording home. That night, I sat on my apartment floor and listened again, then one last time. After that, I placed it in the box with my mother's letter and closed the lid. Some truths are not meant to be played forever. They are meant to unlock a door. The final confrontation happened at the company anniversary event. We held it in the renovated warehouse behind the office. Employees, vendors, clients, and families came. There were lights across the ceiling, food tables, project displays, and a wall of photographs showing the company's history. For the first time, my mother's picture was not hidden in a drawer. It stood beside Dad's at the entrance. Under it were the words, Richard and Evelyn Bennett, co-founders. People noticed. Some smiled. Some looked surprised. Some older employees stopped in front of the photograph for a long time. One of them, a retired foreman named Paul, touched the frame gently and said, "About time." I almost cried right there, because sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes justice is simply a name put back where it always belonged. Mason looked furious. He arrived late with Claire, both dressed like they were attending a coronation that had been stolen from them. During the short speech, I thanked the employees first, then vendors, then clients, then Teresa. Then I turned toward the photographs. And tonight, we correct something that should have been corrected years ago. Bennett Construction was not built by one man. It was built by Richard Bennett and Evelyn Bennett. My father gave this company its face. My mother gave it its bones. The room applauded, not politely, warmly. I saw older employees nodding. Some wiped their eyes. Mason walked out before the speech ended. Claire followed. I did not stop them. Afterward, outside near the parking lot, Mason waited. His face was red. "You just had to erase Dad." I shook my head. "No, I told the whole truth. You're angry because the whole truth makes less room for your version." He stepped closer. "You think you won because of paperwork?" "No. Then what?" I looked through the warehouse doors at employees laughing, families eating, Teresa explaining a project board to a client, and my mother's photo under warm lights. "I won because I stopped begging people like you to see me." That silenced him. Claire appeared behind him. "Olivia, one day you will regret dividing this family." I looked at her. This family was divided when love became inheritance strategy. She flinched. Mason looked away. For a moment, they both seemed smaller than I remembered. Not harmless, never harmless, but smaller. That is what happens when you stop kneeling emotionally. People who looked like giants become human-sized. Mason left without another word. Claire followed. I watched them go and felt something I did not expect. Not triumph, not sadness, relief. The kind that comes when a storm finally moves far enough away that you can hear your own breathing again. Years later, people would say the lawyer changed everything. They were wrong. The lawyer revealed everything. My mother changed everything when she protected her share. My father changed everything when he finally told the truth on paper. And I changed everything when I stopped apologizing for being the daughter who stayed. Bennett Construction did not become perfect. No company does. But it became honest. That mattered more. Teresa eventually became Chief Operating Officer. Caleb from accounting, who had once been afraid to speak in meetings, became Finance Director. We created a scholarship in my mother's name for women entering construction management. The first recipient was a 19-year-old named Grace, who told me, "My uncle said construction is no place for girls." I smiled and said, "Good, then build one." When I stood in the office late at night, I no longer felt like a ghost. My mother's mug sat on my shelf. The blue envelope was framed in my private office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes justice does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in a sealed envelope for years, waiting for the right person to open it. My father left everything to my brother. That was what everyone believed. Mason believed it. Claire celebrated it. The family accepted it. For a few minutes in that lawyer's office, even I believed it. Then the lawyer spoke, and one sentence turned a lifetime of being overlooked into a truth no one could bury again. I was not the forgotten daughter. I was not the emotional one. I was not the office girl who should be grateful for scraps. I was Evelyn Bennett's daughter. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who knew where the cracks were, because I had spent years holding the walls together. And when the time came, I did not take everything from my brother. I simply stopped him from taking what was never his. That was enough. So if you ever find yourself in a room where everyone is smiling because they think you lost, stay calm. Let them smile. Let them lean back. Let them count what they think belongs to them. Because sometimes the truth is already in the room, folded, sealed, waiting. And when it finally speaks, The people who ignored you will hear your name like thunder. Stop.